Welcome back. I guess Happy New Year for Bob. This is the first time we've been here in person in a long time. Forgot what it looks like. Welcome to Planning Commission. February 28th, last day of the month, and it is a study session. So, welcome everyone. I see members of staff here. Welcome to you too. Look forward to seeing you all. I guess I'll turn it over to staff to go ahead. There's no pledge of allegiance, very informal tonight, right? Yes. Study session, so.
Just a study session.
Take it.
So we're going to go a little off script to start out here. And as you'll notice, we have some extra faces. This is our community development and community services team. And with our new ULUC, there's a lot of staff involvement in the code now. So I wanted you guys to know who the staff is. We have had some changes in the last several months. So I'm just going to take a minute. I'm going to have kind of go around and have people introduce themselves and how long they've been with the city and maybe where they came from, and also their kind of professional area of focus.
If you don't mind, I think we would just go around the whole planning commission and have everybody introduce themselves as well.
Yeah. So, Serene, why don't you start with you?
Hi everyone, my name is Zareen Tasneem. I'm the new planner 2 with the staff. I've been here for all of 3.5 months now. Coincidentally, I guess I ran into Sherry last week during the neighborhood meeting. So AICP certified planner. I've been working in the Front Range for a couple of years now. Most recently I just came from the city of Wheat Ridge as a planner. So helping out with Mike and the team in terms of development review and kind of all other needs as they come up. So happy to meet you all tonight and hope to see you guys again in the future for other cases, and hope you don't drill me too much.
Hello everybody, I'm Cindy Perry. I too am relatively new. I think we might have started the same day, I'm not sure, but about 3.5, almost 4 months in, and I'm the Economic Development Director. I've been in Colorado for about 2 years. Prior to this, I was working with City and County of Denver on the workforce development side. And then prior to that, I had almost 20 years of public sector experience in California, working with the city and a county there in economic development, public works, workforce, and in the city manager's office. So kind of a mixed bag here. So really excited to be here in Littleton and look forward to working with all of you.
Hey everybody, I'm Justin Montgomery. I'm a new senior planner. I've been here for 5 months with the city. And previously I've worked in the public and private sectors, with the longest stint being in Jefferson County for 6 years. So yeah, I'm also AICP. I think my focus right now is development review, but I'm interested in all aspects of planning, current and long range.
I know most of you, but not everyone, and I'm Andrea Mimnaugh, and I'm senior planner, also AICP. I'm coming up on being with the city for 18 years, and I do development review, but also historic preservation, which is most of my focus this year at least, and I am liaison for the Historical Preservation Board.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Sutherland. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development, and we've seen each other many times in the past, so looking forward to a new year of activities and cases and all that good stuff.
Jennifer Henninger, Community Development Director, and we've worked very closely on ULUC and other projects, and we'll work closely still.
Bruce Stallman, Planning Commissioner, been I think on Planning Commission for about 6 years, and been involved with the city for 13 or 14 years. And so, yeah, welcome to all of you. We're glad you're here.
Dave McFadden, I'm Commissioner alternate number 1. I've just starting my second year, and this is my first time in city government, but local HOAs and things like that I've been president of and stuff like that, so.
So I'm Robin Hoadley. I am 5 years old now, and it's nice to see you guys.
Is it really your birthday?
Not until April. I think we're all April birthdays here.
Leap year.
Is it my turn?
Yeah.
Dave Bolt, I am on the planning commission, I've been on the planning commission for 9 years almost. Next month, I guess. So I'm almost done.
Term limited. Greg Coronado, I'm the chair for this past year. And my background is landscape architecture, and I work also for City and County of Denver for the past 3.5 years. Before that, I was in the private sector, was consulting for many years for planning and design firms. So welcome.
I'm Sherry Allman. I've been on here, I think this is my 4th year. Just almost finished with my first year of my second term. And I have a background in county government administration, primarily workforce development, community development, several different areas. So anyway, welcome aboard.
Hi, my name is Dan Miller. This is my second term in Planning Commission, and previously was with the Historic Preservation Board for a couple terms. And my day job is an architect. So welcome to the team.
Yeah.
Village idiot.
Excellent. All right, so that takes care of introductions. And then the next thing I would like to just cover is just how did we get here? And just a reminder of the process, the amazing process that we actually went through over the last 2 years to get to this point. And it actually started way before that with the visioning that we did and the comprehensive plan. And a lot of the comprehensive plan had a lot of goals associated with fixture regulations. And a lot of, hey, let's do this amendment to our land use code. And we created from that, that guidance from the comprehensive plan, our unified land use code. And when we were going through that effort with the unified land use code, we had kind of 4 guiding principles, or what we I would say our litmus test to what we're seeing in development out there. And really how we're using it at ULUC is to mitigate risk. So we want to make sure that what we have in there is mitigating any risk to the city. We also want to assure transparency. So make sure that we have clear guidelines, clear regulations, not even just guidelines. And also add predictability to the process, because that is something we heard from both citizens and developers, is that there was a lack of predictability, that we could get all the way through the process, and then a board could really change the direction. And then last is to establish consistency. And you will see tonight, when we bring you some of the things that we're seeing in chapter 9, that there's a lot of clarification and consistency issues that we would like to bring some solutions to you on those. So that's really the lens that we're looking at the code and development as we're getting in. So just kind of keep that in mind for when we're asking for modifications. Something also unique with the ULUC is the changing roles of both City Council, Planning Commission, and staff in the development process. So as I stated, the ULUC really captured the character of Littleton and what we heard from our citizens of what they're wanting. With the ULUC, we also adopted a new zoning map. And that was, again, adopted by City Council. So City Council set that policy, set the zoning for the city. After that had been established, really what we're looking at City Council's role now is code and zoning changes. So if we have fundamental changes that changes the policy direction, that's what we're going to bring to council. also, if we have a rezoning, that's also what we're gonna bring to council. We did establish the master development plan process, and really that's where planning commission comes in. That's gonna be one of your biggest roles, is are the development that we're seeing meeting the guidelines and the regulations set forth in that master development process? And that really lends itself to our, we had existing zoning in the city that we had to basically recognize in terms of our community development, that there was some vested interest there. So we established the PLO. And we'll talk about that PLO process actually in our next planning commission meeting. Again, this meeting is really going to focus more on that master development plan process and explaining now what planning commission's role is in that, as well as staff's role in that process. The ULUC really pushes down the decision-making to planning commission or other boards, and really fundamentally the code is more staff administratively possible. And that helps with that clarification, the consistency, the transparency, and mitigating risk. So that's just kind of in a nutshell what our new roles are with the ULUC. All right, now that we've established that, we're going to go into our actual PowerPoint presentation for this evening. Do you all have any questions about how we got here? Kind of what planning commission's role is? I will state, one of our big things in creating the ULUC again was that clarity. And we really went to what was going to be user-friendly for our users. And that was, we're adding more visual elements, such as tables and charts, as well as illustrations. So when we were doing any modifications between planning commission and city council, we were focused on making sure that those tables were clear and our charts were clear. And we do realize that there were some items that were missed in terms of the wording and matching the table. But for us, the table is what is providing that clarity and consistency and understandably. Because if you keep the user in mind, what we came up with staff is that most of our users are going to look first to the table because it's easy to understand. And then they would be looking for that wording. So just kind of keeping that in mind. So yes.
Maybe a question, just as we go through and there's agreement to make modifications, which was envisioned, no pun intended, all along. What's the process for that? Is it administrative? I assume at some point it has to come back as a recommendation from planning commission to city council so that it can be included in the regs, the ordinance.
Correct.
Okay.
So two things on that. One is we have this amazing software called Encode, which is very user-friendly. We can do modifications right in it, and we will do the red lines in it. So as we discuss on the back end of Encode, so all of us kind of have a user experience on the back end where we can plug in those changes. And then we will bring those actual red lines to you. The intention is to bring the red lines you discuss in March and April to you in May. So you will see the actual changes that we're recommending. So in red line format, like you've seen those before.
Sure. So
on the type of categories of fixes, when we talk about our typos, and Michael talked a little bit more about those you're not gonna see. We're gonna go ahead and make those changes, but the consistency, conflict, and clarification, that's where we're gonna need to bring you some red lines to get your okay on that. So, yes.
Are you finished with Bruce?
Did I answer your question?
Yep.
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure. I wanted some clarification. You were talking about making sure the tables were up to date and well, which is fantastic. Of course, we want good tables. But in the ULUC, it says if there's a conflict, the code goes before the table. So it's important for the wording to be accurate because that's where we're going to go first if there's a conflict. And I mean, that's some of the stuff that I was talking to Reed about on what we voted upon and the differences that were changed in the upcoming, the one that's now finalized, but it says conflicts, the code comes first, the writing comes first. And I think that has to be emphasized, otherwise we're going against our own code.
And we have addressed that in part of our changes that we have in there as to how we would address that. So
That's what it says. It says that code conflicts, that the code comes first, the text comes before the tables.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Nope.
No? Is it perfectly acceptable?
It says what it says.
So part of that, coming back to planning commission and to council, those bigger changes would be addressed at that time where there's actual conflicts. I think that's what you said, right?
Correct.
So that would not be a housekeeping change. I think that gets to your question that there are things that are more than just typos that need to be addressed and
Right, it's the
they
conflicts.
would need a vote and a vote. So yeah. I guess one other question I had was what we hope to accomplish this evening, because as you can see the agenda was quite full and could be, I mean, we could go all night, I think, with the 8 pages of notes, and they're very comprehensive. I appreciate you tracking those, but what and I don't want to get ahead of your presentation because I think you'll probably cover all this, but I just want to kind of understand what the big picture, what we want to accomplish this evening.
Great question. And Robin had actually asked that question, and I apologize for any confusion that there was. So, you all are amazing, but we are not going to go over everything this evening. And actually in the PowerPoint, I need to change some dates because apparently I had some wrong dates in there. But we've really broken it out. And so the purpose tonight is we would like to bring to you kind of a written interpretation of the master development plan and how we see that working, because we actually have 4 applicants right now that are interested in this process. So we just want to get some, we have the direction, we're looking for some confirmation on how we are interpreting that process based on how it is written right now. And then if there's anything that we do need to change, we would like to discuss that. And then as time permits, we also have an additional handout that the planning staff has put together that is narrowly focused on chapter 9. And actually, probably Justin, did you hand that out?
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody has that. So you will have the chapter 9 focus, so that will be our focus this evening. And I would say probably at least 30% of those in there relate to the MVP process. That will be covered in the discussion, the written interpretation. So, does that?
That answers
So the goal is we'll try to wrap up by 8:30, 9 o'clock, but we don't need to go all night on this, and we'll continue the discussion. But I have broken out the chapters as well as some of these higher level kind of conflict or policy discussions that we would like to have with you over the next 2 months. Yes.
I have a question. I don't think this was addressed in this conversation, but some of the other discussion was around what clarification of roles of planning commission versus council versus admin in terms of what we review, what we don't review, that kind of thing. So will that fall under this discussion that we're having tonight?
Yes.
Will that fall under, okay, later discussion, okay.
Right, and if there's still some conversation, I can say, from the standpoint of these fine tunings, and this, our focus really for this year through July is on the fine tunings. So on that list of items that you have there in front of you as part of the attachment. But I also would say there are other issues that I know that we put in a parking lot that we did not discuss. Or we actually removed from the ULUC and what was adopted. And those are the items we'll probably add to that list, but we'll bring those to you starting in the fall probably in August, we'll crack open some of those. We'll need to do that on a paced basis. But for the purposes of really these next 6 months, I would say it's more of a staff-led process at this point of this is what we're seeing, these are the conflicts that we're seeing, here are staff recommendations on how to handle that. And we're looking for confirmation from Planning Commission, or if you're hearing anything or seeing anything that we need to address, we want to hear that as well. Alright, thank you. Any other questions before we jump in? All right. So as we've been going through the code, we, as you saw, the 8-page document, and actually I think it was a 12-page document that we collaborated down to 8 pages. But I would say, you know, on our planner of the day calls, we're adding to this. You know, interpretations, what are we looking at? So I've been able to categorize what we've been seeing into these 4 categories, and that's typo, consistency, conflict, and clarification. And what Mike and I have asked staff to do is kind of pick something from chapter 9 that falls under one of these categories and have them go into a little bit more detail. So we'll start the discussion there, and then we'll go through the rest of the PowerPoint. So, you want to start with typos?
You bet. Bruce, did you have a question?
Yeah, I think IBC here is International Building Code.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, which we, just a quick update on that, we are currently on 2012, much to Reed's chagrin. And we are jumping to 2021. And so that was going through the Building Board of Appeals and City Council. We're actually going to City Council next week with an update of where we are on that process. But the hope is that we will adopt with minimal amendments all of the international codes. I think we're slated for June or July for adoption on that, so.
Then we should be on the regular 3-year cycle like other communities, so.
Great question.
So the first category, and we hope this is the last time we talk to you about this category, you know, among all the categories, this is the one where we're hoping you never see this one again. And that staff fixes some of the typographical errors, or as the code calls it, Scrivens Errors. And these are things that staff is authorized to fix under the new code. But as an example, there may be a broken link in the code. There is a broken link in one of our tables. I couldn't find a great example in chapter 9. But there's a broken link on definition of height in one of our tables, and it takes you to gross floor area. You know, things like that, staff can fix, and hopefully you don't have to kind of worry about things, you know, items like that. There are also references, and this was the way the code was adopted. There are references to the Main Street Historic District that are still in our code because that was adopted slightly first. And as we caught up with the code, that became the Downtown Historic District. And those are items that we'd expect to be able to fix without having to either go back to the Planning Commission or the City Council with an ordinance. Those would be considered hopefully Scrivener's errors. That we could correct right in the document, just make it easier for everyone to use without, it doesn't seem like there were many typographical errors per se, there are a few, but we're mainly talking about links, broken links. There are references to sections that don't exist. We need to correct those, but that's the type of thing, and really as we go forward, there's you know, that is the most minimal of any of the changes that we do. And we bounce that off the city attorney's office just to make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds there, because that's fairly serious. You know, we do not want to do anything as a Scrivener's error that constitutes any substantial change to the code. Numbers, words, we wanna make sure not to overstep our bounds. But really, that's sort of the last we're planning on talking about, typos. And everything else would fall into the other categories. So with that, we'll turn it over to consistency issues. Is that,
We're removing the profanity in there too.
well, some of them, our consultant was from Texas and we can't quite get rid of all of it.
Just to see who's paying attention.
Okay,
Well,
so.
there was some comment about, that pictures and, I think a little of that's added coloring. That was a joke.
Added color, I get it.
Okay, so for consistency, there are places in the ULUC where we have found different sections of code that use different terminology or perhaps don't have the same numbers. But consistency can also refer to sections that we found that have set up a certain format and maybe one or two items within that format don't quite fit the format that we've set up within that section. And one example of this that I brought, perhaps a little bit different, is in the area of expiration dates for approved plans. And so for all application types, you know that we have expiration dates. But in ULUC, we don't have one for abbreviated site plans. And so for consistency, and perhaps also for good governance, abbreviated site plans should also have an expiration date. And our initial thoughts are that perhaps abbreviated site plans would have the same expiration date as site plans, which would be 2 years.
So the next type of fixes that we're looking at is conflicts. Not only broadly, we're looking at conflicts with the ULUC and the IBC that's going into effect, one of which, for example, is height, is the ULUC aligning with height definition with the IBC. Specifically in Chapter 9, we're also interpreting conflicts as policy changes that might need to occur. For example, all administrative decisions are appealed to the Board of Adjustment, and there needs to be sort of a adjustment to the code to delineate maybe some decisions might better fit to go to the BOA, but also it might be better to send some to Planning Commission or to HPD. For example, an appeal to an administrative adjustment, that's fine if it goes to BOA since they review variances, but if there is an appeal to an administrative site plan, that might be better suited for that to go to Planning Commission as an appeal process. So some higher level policy changes that might come out from conflicts issues.
Can I ask a quick question, sorry? We're talking about the 2021 IBC that you're trying to get it to, or the 2013 one that you're still using?
2021.
Okay, 2021, okay, I just because that hasn't officially been green lighted, correct? To go to 2021, or?
We as the city, no,
No.
we have not, and that's what's going through the process.
Right, but you're anticipating it will, so that's the code you're looking at.
Yes, 2021.
And most of the changes we've seen so far and related to the IBC, they're definitions that are expected to be consistent from 2012 all the way through to 2021.
Okay.
So yeah, most of them are really not dependent upon
The year.
the year. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Right, and then the fourth category of fix that we have is clarification. And that's where kind of a lot of the potential edits kind of fall into this category. And kind of the larger discussion topics that we're gonna bring back to you in the next study sessions will fall under this. So the master development plan we plan to talk about tonight in our next session on March 14th. And then the PLO process on March 28th, we plan to talk about that during that study session. And then cottage courts in April. And another, like, I guess, smaller example of a clarification, is related to our public notice section. It refers to neighborhood meetings within that section, but does not provide, clarity on the notification for neighborhood meetings. And so that's an area where we feel we can make a quick clarification and answer people's questions.
Any concept on, or any questions on how we categorize that?
Yeah, I guess going back to Andrea's discussion of consistency, and I know one of the comments that I was reading through had to do with the tables, the master land use table in the first chapter, and then each chapter has their own versions of it, and there's a potential whenever you duplicate or have redundancy that one might not match the other. I guess that would fall into that category as well, like having the same table in two different locations.
That would fall into consistency. I suppose if there is a conflict between what's in those two separate tables, then we would have to put that in a different category.
Yeah, there's always a risk of that when you duplicate. One changes, the other one doesn't.
It's not just a risk.
It's a reality.
So yeah, we're gonna try and catch as many of those as we can.
Any other questions from the commission?
Is Kendrick Keast involved with any, are they kind of done, or are they still retained as a consultant on anything, or?
So we have the ability to reach out to them and ask them questions on that, and they actually are also the provider of the Encode software. It's a separate company, but founded and developed by KKC. So we do have them on contract. We're trying to do as much of it as we can, staff-wise, because we're actually the ones that have to administer it. So yes. So, all right, you wanna take this slide?
Yes, certainly. So we call this the knowns and the unknowns. And I think as the city adopted the ULUC, Planning Commission and the City Council, we were aware that there would be adjustments needed and fixes. So hopefully none of this is a surprise to anyone on Planning Commission or City Council. And it's a ongoing list. We're not trying to capture everything in one shot here. And we've been working, since the implementation of this new code, we've been working with the citizens and the contractors and applicants for new processes, really, an implementation of this, making it go live on I think it was October 28th roughly of 2021. It was sort of a good way because, you can look at a code up and down, and we all did this over the course of the summer. Planning Commission and City Council, we read every word of it. But until you apply it to a piece of land, you really can discover new things that you may not have thought of as it was being drafted. So it's been a collaborative process with the citizens of Littleton who are applying for building permits and that type of thing. And they've been very gracious in figuring out how we're implementing this and pointing out areas where we've got, these 4 types of issues. So that's what we've been working on in these past several months to bring that list together, and we add to it almost certainly weekly. We've added items to the list, and we'll plan to continue that. So we'll probably have a similar discussion as we move forward in the years to come of things that conflicts that we may not have seen until next November or next December or even beyond. So we're trying to pick up as many of those as we can and put them into this first round. Although there are other items that we need to work on as a work plan in the future. I think one of the big ticket items that we had to put on hold was housing affordability, a critical issue to the city of Littleton and the Front Range really. And we need to work on that and see what we can put in place in the future. But we'll have to put that into a work plan. That's not exactly something that fits into any of our categories. So we've got some code work to do in some of those areas as well, and we've got a list of items that we're looking at to put into a work plan. But these are really more of the quick fixes or the changes that we've seen that are necessary to provide additional clarification for some of these applicants and homeowners that want to come through with different types of applications. ENCODE is, as Jen mentioned, is run by KKC, and they've got great involvement there. We've all been, staff has been trained in how to use ENCODE, but it's a fairly powerful tool. We can put proposed changes into kind of sidebars of ENCODE. And there is the potential that we could publish proposed changes within ENCODE and get citizen feedback within that platform. That's something we didn't have the capability to do under our previous code. It may be a very powerful tool for engagement for the citizens of Littleton, and it's an exciting possibility. So we're looking into that, how we can use its capabilities a little bit better, and also make adjustments to ENCODE. The KKC is working on the website and how to make sure that things are intuitive for the operators. There's obviously a lot of tweaks we need to do there, and getting that so that the frequently asked questions, or gee, I want to build a fence in my backyard. Can I click somewhere that everything I need to know about fences comes up in one easy click of the website, so that a citizen can find out, gosh, I don't know, it seems like our planner on call system, which is where we assign a planner to take the various calls that come in from the day for planning. We have a fence and deck season that is rapidly approaching, and most of the calls we get in are for fences and decks and pergolas and things like that, sheds. That's really important, and if the website can help us and help the citizens, that's great news for everyone. So it's got a lot of new capabilities that we're working out with KKC. And really that's kind of, we're trying these fixes, we'll have more fixes, we're expecting them. And then we'll have a work plan, and this is going to take us through 2023 and beyond, making adjustments. And I think we're not an outlier in this. A lot of municipalities that have developed these new codes, particularly ones that take steps toward form-based ideas, make these adjustments. The municipalities I can think of that have done this project recently, they're all doing sort of similar things, so they're making adjustments as they move forward. So just wanted to make sure that you are all aware of sort of the long range outlook on code adjustments and work programs.
Any questions on that? Yes.
Mike, how would you characterize the development community's sort of reaction to using, is it the feedback been constructive? Are they happy, or are they disgusted?
Planners, but I think there's some excitement about the flexibility of the new code. We saw that initially with the downtown, with phase 2 is what we called it back then, but the development of the downtown code. We saw some excitement in some of the different flexibility that the code provided and adaptability. When we talk to developers about parking requirements, there's a lot more in the new code related to adaptable parking and that type of thing. A case Justin worked on or is working on, and actually Cindy, Justin, and I, actually everybody on the team did a little bit on it. The Cherry Cricket is planning to come to Littleton Boulevard. It's an exciting development that could be a catalyst for a reinvigoration of that portion of Littleton Boulevard. Well, the code provides a great deal of flexibility there for an adaptive reuse that we really didn't have in the previous code. And I think, there's been some good reception of that. We, paint the whole picture. We've definitely heard from applicants that want to do things that the code doesn't allow. And they can be fairly disappointed. That's part of the planner's jobs, is to kind of explain how the code works and what it allows. There's also applicants that can get a little frustrated with the process of discovering the code together. There is no we're in the implementation process. We've been kind of working together to find ways through the code, and it's not to this point it's not second nature yet, like the old code was. You get a call and bang, you knew the answer because you knew every little nook and cranny of the previous code. Well, we're still working on that, but we'll get there.
So it was yes or no, and now it's sometimes maybe.
Yeah, it's like, something that seems like it should be a quick answer, and this is part of the frustration. Let me look that up. We have a staff meeting about it, and we argue and we fight and we come up with an answer.
I think one thing that's really cool about the Encode software is that to share links to the public is really easy. It's just a good way to get them into the code to look at the exact language that we're looking at instead of cutting and pasting how you would have to do. So I think that's a really cool feature we have.
We definitely are not seeing a drop in applications because we have a new code. I would say if anything, the application pace has increased because of the new code.
I guess that's good.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the big things that we have been working on as staff is since October is creating our submittal requirements. So before we used to call them operational standards. So an applicant knew what needed to be submitted, what was expected of them. So with some of the processes that we have, there was definitely a crossover, site plan, it's very similar to site plan before. But we also created some new processes. So we had to create new submittal requirements and new checklists. So this staff has been very hard at work in creating those, and we now have those all online. So we would love any feedback on that as well, if you care to take a look at those. So, all right. So now, what we are focusing on for the next few months. So these are what we're calling our immediate priorities, and then we have kind of moderate priorities and low priorities. So our immediate priorities and what we're really looking for and kind of your confirmation on for 2022 is the following. So tonight's meeting and then actually on March 14th, don't wanna keep you on the meeting on March 7th, I just put it on data. So February 28th and March 14th, we'll be focusing on clarification of the master development plan process. And our hope on this is that we have an actual written interpretation, and as Mike alluded to, then we'll be able to actually put that on ENCODE, that we have a written interpretation on that somebody could click on, and they can follow that process. We'll also focus tonight on the chapter 9 fine tuning, and I think we have 20-ish of those. Again, most of those, not most of those, but a large portion of those falling under the MDP process. Then on March 28th, we'll bring to you the PLO, and if you'll remember, the planned overlay designation is the designation that was given to all of our existing PDs and PDOs. So we've had a lot of questions about how one lists the PLO and goes with the underlying zoning. So we'll kind of explain that and ask for some clarification. We'll give you what we're seeing and what we've actually talked to our outside legal counsel on of how to handle those PLOs and get some clarity on that. And then we'll also focus on chapters 1 through 3 on fine tuning. And I would say we might only get through chapter 1. If any of you have noticed, chapter 1 is our largest chapter of the ULUC. And I want to say it's probably a third, if not more, of the actual code. So we do have quite a number of things on there that we're needing some clarification and consistency issues on. And then April 11th and 25th, we'll bring to you the concept of cottage court communities. We're just looking again for confirmation on our interpretation of that. And so if you remember, the cottage court community, new concept for us, and we have a couple different places that it's referred to. And there are some consistency issues with how it's referred to in different sections. So bring that to you. And then chapters 4 through 8 and 10 through 12, and I would say 10 through 12 has very few changes on that. And then in May, what we're suggesting is we bring the actual red lines, so how we're proposing to the new language in the code to do the clarifications and consistency changes. So we'll actually probably bring that to you in the ENCODE format, so you can kind of see how we do that on the back end. So we'll probably have Justin, who we've made kind of our expert ENCODE user, kind of give everybody a 101 on how to use ENCODE. And then June is when we're slated to actually have our public hearing on the proposed modifications and fine tunings of the ULUC. So.
And I'll check with our clerk's office to see if we can correct this slide to have the proper dates tomorrow. We don't want to make changes after it's gone out to you, so I'll see if we can change it in the records so that we don't have the incorrect dates.
You need those dates?
Yes.
Those dates that we're
Yes, those
looking at
dates.
right now.
So
Yeah,
it should
the
be March
dates.
14th and March 28th.
Yeah, but for any citizens that look at the PowerPoint afterwards, we'll see if we can correct it.
It looks like a pretty full schedule between now and June, every other Monday, no skips, and there's no public hearings other than the June one right now on the horizon.
There may be a few, we'll have to, and that we'll just have to work into the schedule, but there is the potential that we could have a case that needs a public hearing, particularly, when we're talking now through June, there's definitely a potential that one could require a public hearing in that time frame.
One other item I wanted to mention is we have two of our esteemed colleagues that will be termed out of this. We'll have some new faces. I assume that council has interviewed new candidates, and the first meeting in April, then we should have some new commissioners.
That'll be a formal meeting, and we'll do some board training as well that date. So we'll have to kind of adjust that'll be a shorter session on the ULUC needed fixes, but because there's other business to attend to that evening.
And again, we'll provide you kind of, this is what we're suggesting to do, so I think it'll make it a little bit easier on that. Any other questions on that immediate priorities? Fabulous. And then our moderate priorities, again, I think those will come to fruition and see what comes out on top that we'll be dealing with starting in the fall. So we would basically start bringing things to you in September on that, and then we would go through that same process. So really I think something important to remember on the ULUC is, it's new for all of us, it's exciting. We don't want to keep changing it. We need to see how it works. So we really want to minimize the amount of times that we change it. So hence the reason that we've set out this schedule. We'll do some changes in June, and then we'll probably won't touch it again. We'll be working in the background, but we won't touch it again and bring anything to a public hearing until late spring of next year. Does that make sense? Okay, excellent. All right, so this kind of brings us to, we're gonna jump to our master development plan. So 2 things this evening, and this is a lot of verbiage that's on these next 2 slides. But really, when a master development plan is going to come to Planning Commission, these are going to be your decision criteria. So one of the things that we wanted to do is just first get you familiar with what the criteria is and what you're going to be thinking of when these master development plans come to you. And then the second aspect, and where more of our focus is going to be, is in actually that whole workflow. And we've put this together per the request of several of our applicants that are interested in doing the master development plan process. And they had some questions of, what does this mean? What does that mean? So I think probably our best bet on this is to go through the workflow. And then I think these will make more sense, and we can go back to these if you have any questions. So I think what we're gonna do is actually jump to the 1-page handout that you have. It says Master Development Plan Draft, Written Interpretation. So since we sent out the attachment, we have put in some additional information, because we got some feedback from staff. And some of our potential applicants have additional items that they're looking for some clarification on. So, do you want to walk through this? Do you want me to walk through this, or?
You know what, let's give another person a chance. Justin, do you wanna walk through?
I certainly do, thank you for asking.
Wait a minute, is that a little suck-upping going on over there?
You can all read, I don't know what the best thing to do, if we wanna read it out loud or just start with the, the layout, decision criteria. I think a lot of this stems from the questions we're getting from applicants as to, hey, does the content that needs to be provided need to be written or graphically provided? And we're like, well, we need to go back to the decision criteria and then kind of walk through what makes sense, what would, how would you feel comfortable, what makes you feel comfortable approving a project? Is it a written form or having some graphics to it? And so the first one with layout, so the subject property is laid out in an efficient manner relative to the natural and built environments and designed to achieve the aims of a compact, highly walkable environment. So, do we wanna go through the decision criteria or do we wanna go through I'm sorry, I got a little. I apologize.
I think you probably could do a pretty good job of
Weaving
them
it,
together.
okay, so
Yes.
sorry about that. So tract 1, tract 1 is the master development plan at a conceptual level. And the idea is, if you are under a plan development, you know, this is how to get the plan development terminated, if you will. So I guess I'm a little off of what we should discuss right now, so I apologize.
A question, because now we've gone to PLOs, not plan developments now, right?
Correct.
So when you're saying plan development, do you mean PLOs or?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
exactly. Yep, everything's a PLO that was a plan development.
Thank you.
So, let's see here.
And
How's
just
the best way to
a
over?
quick introduction of these two tracks. As we looked at initially when we read the ULUC, we thought, well, you've got to pretty much provide a site plan level detail for at least the first phase, if you're gonna do this master development plan. And a quick reminder, master development plans are for developments that are over 10 acres, developments that have over, 150,000 square feet of, or.
Big.
Yeah, big developments, there you go, thank you, Cindy, put it in terms we can understand. Big developments and mixed use developments. So in reading this the first go around, we said, well, gee, you know, it looks like you would need site plan details. There's two spots where this is located in the code. One is in chapter 9, and then another is chapter 3 under commercial mixed use. And those are, you know, we would like to move that all into chapter 9 so it's easy to find. That was one piece of feedback that we received from the applicant community. That, gee, that's kind of sneaky to put it in two spots. So we agree. But in reading it very carefully, it appears that you could do a more conceptual plan, and that would be the first track. Or you could potentially do a site plan level detail on at least one of the phases and kind of skip the site plan step. And go right to building permit if that's approved by the planning commission. Under that conceptual piece, if a conceptual site development plan were to be approved by the planning commission, they would still have to go through the site plan step and pick up all of those criteria. Does that, just wanted to back up and give a little bit of background there on the two tracks that we think are available to applicants. And does that make sense to the commissioners? I know we have been trying to wrap our heads around this for a few months. So I can appreciate if you've just sort of read this being sort of, gee, but in concept, does that idea make sense that there could be two types of master development plans but nobody gets to skip any of the steps. You either do a pretty detailed master development plan, or you do a more general one that shows you everything you need to see and follow that up with a site plan that kind of fills in the gaps.
How do you anticipate this coming about, when they will choose a conceptual versus a detail, the site plan detail?
Entirely up to the applicant.
Kind of what's the pros and cons?
Pros and cons, I would say that if you're ready, let's say a developer who has a large scale idea or a mixed use idea or a phased idea is ready to do some detailed work and wants to kind of move the process along. Could do a track 2 application and, be able to move forward relatively quickly without having to separate their application into components. That I would say would be a benefit to the applicant who's ready to do that type of thing. There are applicants who don't quite know exactly, down to that level of detail, exactly what they wanna do. Or there may be risk, in spending a lot of money putting together a very detailed plan only to get to planning commission and hear the word no. And so there may be applicants who don't wanna take the risk, and each applicant has to weigh those benefits and risks as they make their selection of which track they wanna do.
It was really nicely done, thank you.
And one thing that I do need to state is right now, the way the master development plan is written, it is administrative and it's at the director's discretion that it will go to planning commission. From what we're seeing, and especially if we can have this master development plan, conceptual or master development site plan, we as staff would like the decision to be with planning commission. That staff will review it, but all master development plans would go to planning commission.
All of them versus right now where it's situated, this is how it would happen instead.
Correct. So that is a recommendation that we would like to bring to you, that it be a planning commission, but then not appealable. Planning commission would have the final say on the master development plans. Sorry. Go.
Hear the sign language.
And ostensibly, there'd be a public hearing involved with planning commission's review of the MVP.
Absolutely.
Correct, and actually there is a substantial amount actually of citizen engagement, because I know that is a concern. When we look back at our core values, citizen engagement and kind of an awareness of what's going on is really important. So what is built into the master development plan process right now is actually a series of neighborhood meetings. The first one happening after a pre-planning application. Basically, the applicant would need to notify, and the only notification that they would need to do, we'll get into that, is a mailed notification to property owners within 700 feet would be notified that an application is wanting to be submitted. So that would actually happen before a formal submittal. And then we ask for them again to go back to the public after staff has had a chance to look at it and give comments. So prior to the applicant submitting for the second round of comments, they would need to do another neighborhood meeting, and then the planning commission would be a notified public hearing.
And there's no, we've done a few of these, what do we call them, the PPP?
Correct, P4.
P4?
The P4.
P4
We do
process.
not have that anymore.
Oh, that's adios?
Correct.
Gone.
Oh, okay. Okay,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, that was gonna be my question, because choosing between track 1 and track 2, it's either or, could it be both and? Could it be part of a process where the conceptual is the logical first step for most? And like you said, if somebody wants to move it forward, they can gamble and go for a full detailed plan, but the conceptual level could be kind of like the P4, where they come before the planning commission, share their ideas, get feedback, and then more prepared, and there's less risk associated with pursuing a detailed site plan or site development plan, master development plan.
I agree with that. I think in terms of probability of a better outcome, that feedback loop from the P4 process could make this, help somebody make a better informed decision with respect to how to proceed with the MDP format.
So are you saying an additional plan commission meeting?
Hypothetically, yeah. If that's, these are big dollar projects, and particularly if they're big. And, it seems like a low risk, one extra meeting, a couple extra weeks involved would be value added for somebody who's contemplating doing one of these things, as opposed to, you get to roll the dice and you pays your money to take your shot.
In the P4 process, it was sort of a non-binding feedback from planning commission. So it wouldn't be two votes, the final plan would be a vote for approval, but the initial one would just be feedback.
No, we could certainly take a look at that. It would involve a bit of addition to the code. There'd be, we'd have to add some sections to the code, I would guess, to achieve that. And that maybe, I don't know if we could achieve that on the schedule of these initial changes, but we may be able to put that in kind of a mid-range category to look at adding that to the code. A concept review.
Well, it's already in the code, isn't it?
The
P4 process.
Well, it was in the old code.
Yeah.
And then,
You mean
but I
in
don't
terms of
know.
integrating it here?
Yeah, integrating it here could be, we've got a template, but I think one of the reasons that that was removed was this idea that many of the cases might not need, many of the site plan type cases may not need to go to city council. And the P4 was sort of set up to take a conceptual plan, like a site plan type of thing, both the planning commission and city council. So, trying to have city council just look at the very high level things that may have been a casualty of the new code, but we could certainly look at adding some sort of section like that and see if that's either that may be a little bit more than we can chew in this initial round, but it's something we can definitely look at.
Something to emphasize here is obviously when we wrote the code, we feel like it captured the direction that the city wanted and our citizens wanted. And so creating that consistency, basically the MDP is a developer showing that they have met the requirements that are set forth in the code under corridor mixed. So the MDP isn't creating a different type of regulations. It's showing how they're meeting the corridor mixed or whatever the underlying zoning is. But I would say 90% of our PLOs are where you would see the master development plan is in corridor mix now.
Yeah, and I don't think the argument isn't that it's in addition to what's in here, it's at somebody's option or discretion if they wanted the feedback loop. It's still available for them in terms of making
the non-binding.
Yeah,
Okay.
conceptual versus site plan detail level determination, which I think is where we're sort of trying to figure out how we get one versus the other.
I think it would have benefits on both sides of the table, the developer coming forward with less investment and risk, and the planning commission being able to comment on it before seeing a final product, that we're less likely to, look at big picture things and maybe just, focus on details like fence location or something, so it might be an opportunity to help guide them toward a better solution without just saying yes or no at the end.
It's kind of interesting listening to this because we actually had a discussion on this before we voted on on the final one before it went to council, and we talked about this. And it's fascinating to watch how this discussion has shifted over time. And I think that was one of the whole purposes of the ULIP, was showing that you can morph into what seems to work best for the community. And I think this is a great example of we're seeing right now of that happening.
Question for you, having never been here for a, master development plan coming before, so under the vision you have for it now, would that entire decision criteria be what we would be deciding on basically the first time it comes before us? There's a heck of a lot of, I'm just buying in more to what these two are saying, because that's a lot. We could say no on, or debate it for hours, right? Just because there's subjectivity and all. So I'm just trying to get clear, I'm not criticizing. I just wanna understand that, that's a lot of criteria. So it's only, well done, by the way. It looks like it's only 5 things.
It's only page 1.
That's half.
There's 10 things, but each one is like about 8 or 9 or 10 different things. Okay, just making sure I'm following.
The idea is, of course, this is protecting the community.
Oh, of course.
Well, yeah, that's why I think in my head, I thought we would wanna kind of try to talk about those at some point, either not tonight or maybe next session too, or just start thinking about those decision criteria, because that's a really good point, and that's what applicants are asking us. It's like, well, how are we gonna satisfy this? What are you looking for? And so, it's a good question for all of you.
That's a good question from the developer.
Yeah.
I have a question about that decision criteria. You partially answered it in the sense that a lot of our now PLOs are residential tracts. And when you look at the decision criteria where it talks about compact, highly walkable, urban, that is more like you're saying with the corridor stuff, which, as you said, was 90% of it. What about that 10% right now that's residential? It seems, based on what we have here, that if you are gonna make that big of a change, you're actually looking at a rezoning, so it would not be able to fall under the master plan, this one here, right, the master development plan, my tongue twister. Is that accurate or no?
So I think there's kind of two things going on there. When next week when we bring the PLO type of view, putting some, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of stopgap measures or checks and balances in place if you're talking about, removing a PLO designation. Like, who can do that? What are the situations that would be permitted? So that's kind of one aspect of it. And then I think in terms of size, that's another factor.
The 10-acre aspect.
Right, because one of the scenarios that we've gone through as planners was like, okay, well, what if, in the middle of Southbridge, one person, one property owner wants to do something completely different on their property. They can't do that. Like, there has to be a majority, there's, again, those parameters in place that they would have to meet. So.
It's all good stuff. I'm really concerned about residential at this point. Making a major change in the residential, when you look at this decision criteria, it fits corridor mixed use. It does not fit residential.
Yeah.
So that was my question is how do we see that playing out? Is it, again, when you look at what you're allowed to do, your incremental changes in some of these, it would seem like you'd be, if it was already residential, it might force it into a rezone. If you're looking to try to fit something like this, it would not fit residential.
Yeah. So with those PLOs in like residential districts, I think we're looking at maybe zone map amendments as opposed to rezonings. To where it's the same process essentially, but it would just be to lift the PLO from the property and follow the underlying zone district that was already established.
Because one thing we know is our communities do not want their neighborhoods dramatically changed. This would be a dramatic change.
And also on that same line of discussion, is this criteria based on the plan, or is it just best practice, or where did you come up with this?
This is the ULUC.
It's straight out of the ULUC,
Yeah.
okay, that's what,
It's in there now.
okay,
Section 1095.7.
okay, thank you.
There are different points of view on decision criteria, but I typically if decision criteria are kind of open and shut, that should be administrative, and applicants are always kind of looking for, well, if I just meet this, you have to say yes. And if that's true, it really ought to be an administrative process. To me, decision criteria that's challenging and that people can differ on, I think sometimes are good things, because that's where you go to an appointed board or an elected officials, and they can look at these decision criteria and have differing opinions. But they would look at the development through the lens of these decision criteria. And when you had pointed out, Robin, that that compact, highly walkable, that could mean different things to different people potentially. So I didn't see it as mutually exclusive of a residential development potentially.
It depends on the lot size.
It depends.
If you have a smaller lot size, no. But if you have more acreage, yes, that's a conflict.
Well, and we'd look at it in terms of the lens of the code. So the underlying zone district has certain minimum lot sizes. Potentially if you were proposing, if you owned 10 acres and you were gonna do a master development plan in a small lot residential underlying zone, let's say, and you wanted to do 45,000 acre lots, maybe you would say, maybe a commissioner might say that doesn't appear to be compact in terms of the zoning. But if you were,
But you gotta be careful, we don't want it to be so subjective that we change a neighborhood dramatically. I mean, corridor mixed use, that's a whole nother story, not our neighborhoods. And that's my only concern when I look at this, and I wonder how that could affect our residentials. And I don't think we want to do anything like that.
I guess I can see how these could be applied to residential development unless it was like a really rural, like I think of like the Rangeview
Yes.
neighborhood where there's no sidewalks or curbs or it is written in such a way, I mean, there's certain words in here, urban environment and which shows up in a human scale, amenities, that type of thing, that you would think of as mixed use, more dense. But I could see how, given the underlying zoning is really guiding it, that these could be interpreted for that zoning as well.
But you have to be careful if it's too subjective. That's my concern. You don't want a group of 7 planning commission making a decision on a neighborhood that dramatically changed it. I mean, we had that conversation, in fact, about your neighborhood when we were making some changes to before we voted on the ULUC. It was the same idea. You don't give 7 people permission to go change a neighborhood dramatically.
so I'm worried I might have derailed us a little bit. Justin was kind of going over kind of the 2 tracks. Should we get back to that, or should we talk about decision criteria more, or?
I'd like to walk through the MDP workflow, because I feel like that's a little bit more pressing, because we need to provide clear direction to the applications that we're receiving. But there is a discussion that needs to be had on the decision criteria, and just kind of getting your take on that decision criteria. But if we can switch gears to the workflow, if that's okay with everyone? Okay.
So Jen, if you don't mind, I might ask you to go through the first few bullets under one. I believe all of number one is talking about what happens to the PLO and your existing uses. Is that kind of where it's getting at?
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yep.
So it's part of the question, like what happens to things that are already built, and those would be legal and conforming going forward if they were already permitted. Let's see here. So, in that tract, you submit the master development plan. It's a general plan that, as the conceptual, it's the general plan that describes and graphically illustrates proposed development and must include the required content described in the ULUC. In the same section above the decision criteria, there's A through I of content that needs to be provided. And so in the two tracks, there's either the conceptual, you provide that content at a conceptual level with a conceptual plan, or you provide it within the site plan details sheet with track two. So those are the kind of the two areas that you work on. With both cases, track one or track two, you have the neighborhood meetings. You have a neighborhood meeting before you submit, and then you have a neighborhood meeting after you get the first review comments from staff. So those are the two neighborhood meetings that you would do.
Gosh, if you were on the second track, you need to double those because you do it with master development plan and you do it again with the site plan.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
I hope I got the tracks right.
Track one.
Track
Yeah.
one,
Mhm.
I knew I was wrong, track one. Yeah, you would double up the neighborhood meetings actually because you'd be splitting the process into two
Is
pieces.
that- Is that what we determined?
They can do it together,
Oh,
but if they come in for the next phase on the site plan,
Okay.
they could potentially have to do the neighborhood meeting,
whoops,
so.
disregard.
And Justin, can you go over a little bit on the notification? Cause I know there's been some questions on what notification is required for a neighborhood meeting.
Oh, yes, so neighborhood notifications require 700 feet radius from the property. All owners and tenants, basically, within the 700 feet. And if there's a common interest area that's over 10 units or 10 residents, we try to notify the agency that's involved, or the HOA or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah, something like that. So with the neighborhood meetings notice, the city would be providing that notification as a postcard form, is what we're thinking. And within 10 days before a neighborhood meeting.
So there would just be a mailing, there would not be a posting or a newspaper publishing. So it would just be a mailing for the
Which is-
neighborhood meeting.
How we did it in the old code.
Correct.
A question on that. Suppose there's a piece of property that's up for rezone that's more of a private club or something that's viewed more as a current use as a park type use, and that means it affects the entire neighborhood rather than just people within 700 feet of that property.
There are cases where if you're part of a common ownership and interest community, or a HOA basically, you may need to, there are state laws that govern some of those applications. If you want to dissolve the HOA or something.
It's not, what if there's no HOA though?
Well,
I mean, there's not always an HOA involved. I bring that up almost every time we enter this discussion, that we all don't have HOAs in our neighborhoods. We just don't. I just don't think we could assume that. I'm sure the majority of neighborhoods do, but a lot of them do not.
and I suppose there's there's minimum notification requirements, and we've occasionally in the past asked applicants to go beyond that, at their option, just as, staff can advise them on that. Nobody likes to go beyond the minimum, but sometimes that's really, we advise them to do that if we can, if we have the feeling that that might be the case.
Yeah,
We've certainly done that.
There's also the idea, like, we're sending out the notifications to a 700-foot radius, but there's also word of mouth and other ways to notify people, so it's not an exclusive invitation to those people, once they can always attend when you,
And typically that does happen where neighbors tell neighbors or say, hey, did you know this is happening?
Or it gets on next door or something, and
Yeah, of course.
To that point, why not have a posting requirement, because that'd be a pretty easy way to get word of mouth notification.
We definitely do that for the public hearings, but for neighborhood meetings that we've traditionally done sort of a lesser standard, just because it's, we do it kind of more frequently and
Yeah, and what's written here in the notification, again, that's what's in the ULUC currently, so we're just kind of going by that. So then, the approval track process going down on that would be an administrative review and recommendation to the planning commission, and then a planning commission hearing. And that's where it gets into the other notifications for the actual hearing. And then after, if you do the conceptual master development plan, you do have to follow up with a site plan then after the fact.
Does that address what Bruce and, what you guys were talking about? It's almost like planning commission looks at it before a final site plan goes out anyway. Is that what you were getting at, or no, that wasn't what you were getting at? Okay.
That's not what's in here now. Right now, the first time we'd see it, staff would have their opportunity to review it and work with the applicant to get it, conforming and then make a recommendation.
The P4 was always intended to be a feedback loop to get a better plan when it had ended up submitted.
Even earlier than I see.
Not binding, but feedback.
Gotcha.
Was it a public hearing that people would go? So would it be like a study
Strictly
session?
Yeah, it was the applicant and planning commission providing feedback in order to, ultimately there'd be a public hearing. But this was basically to give the applicant feedback so they could improve the end result.
It sounds like an optional review prior to them going through the MDP and site plan process.
Yeah,
Is
it
there
was,
an additional fee that was associated with that for
it's a small fee.
add-on service
Yeah.
for sure?
Yeah.
but it was totally optional. If they wanted to take advantage of it, they were welcome to, and we had a few that did, but it wasn't an obligation or a requirement.
And this was before they submitted for the formal application.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think it was only a particular few types of the rezoning was one, a plan development was another. And then I thought maybe we added some at the
I
end.
thought the planned overlay was, the PD.
Yeah, PD
Yeah, PD, yeah.
wasn't necessarily available to everyone. Oh, Reed's making faces.
He is.
Just,
He's making sign comments.
I am,
Sighing loudly.
I can share them if you'd like, but.
We're like, no.
Always happens when I'm speaking.
Alright, is track one muddy or clear? Do you guys kind of understand the idea there?
I guess I'm trying to, process sort of the differences between the two and I kind of agree with what Bruce and Commissioner Coronado were saying that developers want ideally to pay as little as possible in the beginning. And so this conceptual route seems to make sense, but I'm looking at it, I go, oh my gosh, I got 5 steps here, and I look at the regular other one, it's 3 steps. So and some of them are similar, right? Some of the processes or steps are similar. like a matrix that would just show kind of, here's your one tract and here's all the various things you have to do, and then,
Yes,
and.
and that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the submittal requirements online might help with that too, to kind of show you the two levels, the two tracks, basically. But yeah.
Did you say, Justin, that if they did track 2, the site plan had to point out everything basically in track 1 that's required except for the conceptual plan itself, right? But all that other stuff, so it may not, it's 3 steps, but a much more in-depth. Yeah.
Yeah, more expensive, cause you got, engineers, architects, yeah.
Right, but it does, so nothing is being skipped,
Thank you.
basically, okay.
You would want that, yeah, they have to
That's
buy
where the
it.
decision criteria really comes into account. You have a lot of options open when you do conceptual. And that's when you need a good, solid decision criteria to make sure that doesn't implode later.
Part of the decision criteria, I think, is staff can help as well through the process. So there is the, development review process this is going through. So I think as we discuss the decision criteria, that'll help staff know to what level the applicant's materials need to be as they go forward. I think that would be helpful. And also, one of the submittal requirements that we have is a decision criteria narrative that the applicants will provide to us going forward, that will kind of in their own words state how they feel they're meeting all of these. So I think that's a good starting point as well for discussion.
I was gonna ask, do you have like a template or are you developing a template for them to, that part of this? Cause I know most cities do, and we did before, right? For a PD, for instance, that spelled out exactly what they had to have, what the sheet size was and.
We're working on that. We've got a few processes in the ULUC that are brand new. This is one of them. It's not really a PD, like, it's not quite like the old PD, but we're kind of developing this and working with some people who are interested in doing master development plans to formulate it and look at it fine-tuned so that you're seeing more consistent documents over time. The first few may vary a little bit.
So I have like a development narrative, some tables, probably an existing conditions plan, a topographic landscape plan.
Right, we've developed a matrix of sorts that says, well, these are absolutely required, and if necessary, you may need to do some of these others as well.
And currently track 2 is more spelled out in our materials because we had that one in mind first with the site plan. So it is, at the site plan level of detail, so similar to what you're saying. It lists all the sheets that would be required and then where the applicant could supplement materials. The conceptual plan, that is one that we are still thinking about and trying to develop. If we have a template for it, or if we want, to see what applicants can provide, like what, I like to say we don't wanna stifle creativity, so.
That's where they come in with the idea boards and the conceptual ideas and prototype images.
VR headsets, yeah.
Like it.
Wait a minute.
But yeah, so, that's part of it. I don't know, where should we go from here? What
time is it? 8:05.
You promised.
As the short timer says.
Was it either or at this point?
Well, how about we do this? So on this decision criteria, can I give you guys a little bit of homework? And that if, now that you're seeing it, and again, this is in the ULUC. This is the decision criteria set forth in, it's section 10.957. be, I think, if we were very specific. So,
Is that bad that you know it by heart?
no, that means you have a staff who's getting in there, yes, we can do that, so really try to take a look at that and start to think, what would you wanna see? And staff is doing that same thing, on our end, and we will have that complete list for you the next time we meet of, this is what we're telling our applicants they need to provide. Does that sound good?
And this is just conceptual,
This is, yes.
or we're talking about conceptual, because with the site plan, that's inherently
Yeah.
gonna be.
It's more detail.
Yeah, and different review criteria, I believe.
There's an additional set of review criteria
Okay.
that's in chapter 3.
And how do you want that feedback and when? Is that a discussion at
I'm completely
the
fine
next
with
meeting, or is that submitted in?
bring it on
edits
March
or-
14th. Okay. We have to officially enter anything into the record.
Pardon?
For a study session, we don't have to officially enter anything into the record. Okay. So for us on the staff side, we will provide the criteria that okay, this is at a minimum what we need to see for the conceptual. So we'll provide that.
Do you have other community examples to review, just to kind of bounce it off, different ideas? I mean, a lot of times you guys actually look at other communities before you make these decisions.
Correct. I've looked into Centennials, and how they have a similar process, so we can look to that.
It helps to generate discussion and thought process, you know, when you're just looking at what you got in front of you, it looks good, but then when you compare it to something else, it can generate more questions.
So with that, we're going to go to chapter 9, which is this handout that you have.
Let's just start. So you wanna?
Hang on 1 second. Perfect, thank you. On this, obviously there's a number of these. You want to take a minute to just look, if you have specific questions. Given the time, I don't think we want to go through every individual one we're done. But if you have ones that you see specifically.
You're looking for our recommendation, just tell them looks good. On what you've come up with, right?
Not necessarily a recommendation, but if you have any thoughts
Gotcha.
of how you would clarify it. Again, staff will bring to you, this is how we're suggesting that it be clarified. Also, I know we're really getting you guys back into the code, because obviously we adopted it and we had some time off, and honestly, that time off was because staff was creating all the submittal requirements. And I think it probably would be helpful, those are all online now, right?
Yeah.
So those are online, you can go into our website and actually, if you type in submittal requirements, they will come up. So it might be interesting for you guys to take a look at those.
Can I suggest for this, you have the different categories, clarification, consistency, conflict. It seems to me that clarifications and consistencies are almost housekeeping.
Yes.
The conflicts are the ones that might scratch on policy issues that maybe we should talk about here tonight. Start with those.
That would be, yes.
And then I think it would help if you or staff would explain each one, because when I read these, some of them
It's kind of hard to see one sentence that's, part of a whole section. Yes.
Is there any other thoughts from Commissioner?
so.
That sounds good.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, we have 13 is the first one that goes into the conflict. And this one I'm going to punt to next week because we're gonna cover that next week.
Chair, hey Craig, I actually have one that's labeled consistency, but I'm not sure it's not potentially a conflict. I mean, number 6 talks about there should probably be an expiration for these approvals if no building permit has been applied for, which that topic has come up a number of times over the years. The idea being that somebody gets a rezone or some such thing and then just sits on it, never does anything with it. And Reed, maybe you can chime in here, but my recollection was that expiration of a approved site plan approval as per the verbiage here, absent a building permit, almost, does that constitute a taking?
No, it doesn't constitute a taking. I would say for those persons who are wanting to quote unquote vest their rights, I mean, we have a vested rights doctrine, there is vested rights at state law. We have our own ordinance in terms of how you can secure that right to continue to do what you wanted to do with that property, but no, it wouldn't constitute a taking if for some reason a building permit expired. I mean, we expire building permits right now. Currently, we hold a building permit open for 180 days, and then you can get a continuance on that, but if not, we'll close out your building permit, you gotta come back in and reapply.
Okay.
So,
All right, no, and I think that's a nice safeguard for the community. There've been a number of, my recollection again is there are various properties were subject to rezoning. I can think of the property behind Aspen Grove was one from years ago that was originally going to be single-family residential or duplexes or townhomes or some such things. And then ultimately, nothing was done. The developer, I think, declared bankruptcy. This is a number of years ago. And then ultimately, the property was originally zoned to office. And then because there was no expiration, the advice was there was no mechanism to do that at the time. Then ultimately more apartments got built, which may or may not have been a good thing, but it's just, if it reverts or an approval expires, it gives everybody the second bite at the apple.
Well, when we went to the Steamboat APA meeting a few years ago, we did some tours of the city and they pointed out that they had instituted that exact thing, that some of these approvals expire over time because they had people, put in a plan and then not do anything, and then you've got developments going on around it, and then maybe it doesn't fit in, or they just want consistent development. And so they decided that would be a good thing. So I know that somebody else is doing, I think more mountain towns, it probably makes a lot of sense for mountain towns just because the speed of development that goes on there.
So just for a point of clarification, hopefully we're all on the same page. There is an expiration date in the code for different types of plans and site plans. This comment was specifically talking to abbreviated site plans. That wasn't set in the code to have an expiration date. So to be consistent with the code and other types of site plans having expiration dates, that's why we had clarified it as consistency, so this one also has the expiration date. So just to put it out there, other site plans do have expiration date in the code.
And you mentioned make it the same as a full site. plan, right?
Mhm.
Seems to make sense.
Okay, then,
Next one is 17.
We resolved 13, sorry.
She could have pushed that.
Oh, okay, that's right.
we will address that next.
Yeah.
meeting. Alright, so 17. Did you put this one in here?
Oh, did I? Okay.
Got it. 17.
Should brought my reader.
This is just setting
okay.
criteria of what is abbreviated versus full.
There's a gap between the two.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a gap between abbreviated site plans and full site plans, so, you know, in working with some of the residents and applicants, we've sort of discovered these sort of gray areas. Maybe we just need to close the gap a little bit more if we can. You know, it would probably help applicants, a little bit, knowing which process they go through.
Yeah, so you're gonna close the gap by moving the bar for the full site plan?
Well, that's the policy piece, right?
Yeah, that's probably the policy piece, so we need to provide you with some language, that, you know, okay, we've got this gap between these two plan types. You know, we'll make a recommendation to you of where we think, you know, do we push the bar all the way up to the full site plan? Or do we bring the site plan bar a little bit further down toward the abbreviated? We'll try and figure that out and make a recommendation.
So we're gonna punt that to next time too.
Yeah. And a lot of these, we don't have the actual code language written out yet.
Right.
We're kind of working on that, but
Makes sense.
you know, just to give you an idea of what we're working on.
Okay. Looks like 25 is the next one. 18, oh, I missed that.
I can talk to
Just trying to move it
the
along.
conflict points if you guys want.
Yeah, please.
So just to move us along, so for number 18, typically for site plans, we don't require people to actually put sign detail information on it because we have a separate sign permit that comes later after a building permit. But I think the thought process in this point is, well, what if you have like a larger development, let's say a shopping center or something like that, and they want maybe a detailed sign plan, something of a master sign plan, and that's not really a application type in the code. So that's kind of like a policy question to you guys in terms of, do we want to create a master sign plan process, especially if we're having some things that are coming out of this master development process. You know, you can see them coming in with certain branding of how they want their signs to look, maybe uniform in color. There's nothing necessarily in our code that requires, like, you know, everything has to be the same color, but if, let's say, a development wants that, is that an avenue we want to pursue? Is that a type of application we want to see and review? What does that look like? And that comes to like a policy and decision question of, is that a new code to be written?
Are you trying to short circuit the, or make shorter the approval process for signs in the future when that is actually required? Cause I don't know that would matter unless the developer wants to make sure that their sign plan meets the city's requirements far enough ahead of time.
Yeah, so usually sign plans come about when a developer has a certain look they want for their development.
Yeah.
So if, let's say, a certain tenant comes in and they're not maybe aware that there is a sign plan and a certain look, they can't propose a sign that's like a certain material, and then the developer has a sign that says like, no, this is not really the look we want in this development, this is the material we want, so we can reference that. So basically it provides more restrictions that might be shown in our sign code.
Yeah, but a tenant is signing a lease and the landlord is telling them in the lease, this is our sign plan. So that won't occur for like a retail tenant who's applying for a sign through, or wanting to put up a sign through the landlord. That's typically spelled out in that lease, so I don't see that as being a real issue. It just means that the developer has to come up with a sign plan earlier than they normally would, probably, to appease the city.
Would a good example be the PD amendment for Evergreen? I think they came in with a whole signage package, right? So if they were to go through, if a developer had an option that they wanted to have a sign program that might not fit the exact criteria of the city's sign code, that they could propose it as part of the master development plan process.
So that is a good question. My understanding of these master development plans is that they still have to adhere to the underlying zone district. And they're really not our old plan developments, you could do a wide variety of things. And the idea behind a plan development was that, for leniency in these areas, let's say taller signs, we get increased design standards in other areas, and there was a little bit of a trade-off. So the code sometimes didn't factor into these PDs as much as I think it would the master development plan. And as Zareen was mentioning, you could do additional restrictions, to materials or potentially heights, that type of thing. But it wouldn't be as Evergreen wanted it, where you could do, taller signs than were allowed by the normal city code or something like that, where you'd have a kind of a variance, as it were, in trade-off for stricter standards elsewhere.
There are a number of communities that do have the process that Serena is talking about, which is, it's called either a master sign package or a comprehensive sign package.
Yeah, I guess it might make sense for something like Littleton Village, where a landlord is selling off tracts and they want a consistent sign package, and what they wanna do is have it approved by the city ahead of time, earlier in the process than normal, so that they could get that out there. But even then, they're gonna have their requirements spelled out to the person buying the property, so that there can be consistency there. So to me, it's just a matter of getting it approved by the city, and whether you wanna do that earlier rather than later, or if it matters even.
And then the city could help regulate it.
Yeah, I suppose.
As we do permits for signs.
But it's only, so let's say a landlord decides, or somebody doing a master development plan who's gonna sell out parcels, decides they want a certain color scheme in their signs, but the signs themselves have to match what the city requires. They can't do anything out of the ordinary, like make them taller, like you said. But they want, so would the city go in and regulate the color scheme then?
So we're fairly, so the new ULUC is content neutral as far as signs, so we don't regulate the words on the sign. But if they said, if there was a master sign plan that said, well, all the lettering has to be brown on these signs, and they said, okay, here's the shade of brown. We would look at that as part of a sign permit and say, okay, is this lettering brown? Yes, it is. Then it's okay. Is this lettering, this is black lettering? Well, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's a perfect example for like Littleton Village then, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, it would definitely be helpful. That would take the landlord out of it, so once they sell the property, then they don't have to worry about it.
Right, and they could double, we could double, we could double enforce it.
Yeah.
The city would take its crack and the landlord just.
Well, then it would be codified too, right, in the overlay district.
Can I ask Cindy a question, kind of from an economic development perspective? So coming out of the council retreat, we heard a lot about the importance of economic development happening within in the economic development world, signage.
Yeah, I mean, Chili's comes to mind, that was a big fight where it came from, you know, they wanted to put the big chili pepper up on top of the building as part of their signage, and we had a variance process, you know, so, I honestly think it could go either way, you know, in the code with the landlord and.
Well, if you look at a city like it might be Greenwood Village, there's, right by the Coble Library, across the street, there's this really nice shopping center development. And they have all these major tenants in there that are national, but the way the center looks and the signage is very specific to that center and more high-end. So they have signage that's upscale from what, you know, I can't remember who's in there that would.
Given this restaurant, King Super, Christie Sports was there.
Yeah, and so they have different signage than they would put up at another location because of the signage plan that landlord has. I mean, that's probably not managed by the city, but it's definitely managed by the center, and they, because of the location, I guess, they can regulate that.
Sometimes they might be regulated by the city though, if there is a master sign plan in place.
Yeah.
Because they would need to get the approval for the signs through the city or the county or whomever.
Yeah, and it could be the city that mandated that originally as well, right?
Oh, it's not necessarily mandated, usually it's something someone elects to do themselves to have that consistent look for their development, in this case, that shopping center, so
Yeah,
it's just an option to consider.
yeah, there are higher end cities, a word or a phrase, that require, the whole town is kind of an upscale area, and they have higher end requirements than you would normally, they require clay roof tiles, whereas McDonald's wouldn't normally do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want a big cowboy, you know.
Yeah, right.
It's neon.
Oh, come on.
Well, maybe we can. I don't.
But yeah, so this is why it becomes like a policy question / like, is this something you guys want to consider pursuing? Is this something we want to bring forward as a code amendment that gets through to you guys, brought it to council, added to the code and things? So it's like the broader policy question of, is this something we want to consider or not? And I don't know if tonight is the night we really discuss this or your next meeting.
Personally, I think it could be an option. I don't know if there would be a requirement.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a requirement, it would just be like an optional thing someone could choose to do, especially with those larger developments that are maybe proposed to come. But just like adding that option in the code, is that something to consider?
I tend to agree. I think, I guess I don't really know what the variance process is for signage. If the assumption was that if somebody had a sign program in a master development plan or any kind of development, they'd have to comply with the city standards, which would limit what they can do. So when would they ask for a variance on that if they want to do something different? During the site plan process, during the master development plan process? What does that look like?
This could be a subject that, we don't wanna bog down some of these other fixes and maybe it's a midterm thing that we look at.
Yeah, to moderate.
Yeah, cause Andrea and I have been talking about historic signs too. Should we have provisions for historic signs? And maybe that's something we tackle a little later. We'll see.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
So the next one is number 25, and that kind of relates to the master development plan process, which again, Mike will bring to you next time. So we're just gonna skip to the next one, which is number 29, that administrative decision appeal process that I had mentioned in my example. Again, kind of aligning different types of processes to better align with who it should really go to. Like I was saying, that administrative adjustment process, if someone's appealing to that, sure, that makes sense for that to go to BOA for the appeal process. But if it's a site plan, that feels more appropriate for that appeal process to come to you guys and planning commission to go through. So again, another kind of policy one for that. The next one that we're looking at is number 31. So again, another policy question of we'll try to discuss about what is a more appropriate time frame than 30 days. Maybe that feels too quick for someone to really make a decision of weighing in factors. Does that become like more of like a 60-day or a 90-day process, kind of coming up with a better number for what's the time frame for that appeal process?
That may vary based on different, maybe a site plan has one appeal period. A building permit or, an administrative decision, maybe a significantly reduced appeal period, I'm not sure.
Well, by appeal period, you mean the decision that somebody will appeal? They have to make that decision quickly, or?
So typically any administrative decision or any, there's always a way to appeal.
Mhm.
And so, when does that appeal have to be filed? You have a date that any particular decision is made, and then, when is the date where an appeal has to be filed? And then, as Doreen was saying, where does that appeal go? Right now, it's pretty, it's 30 days for everything, and, it's pretty, it funnels a lot of things to the Board of Adjustment, which may not be appropriate for a certificate of appropriateness or something like that.
In this case, time is not on the applicant's side, I would think, so that they would have the incentive to move an appeal more quickly.
Oh.
So why would we wanna shorten that?
This is for someone else to appeal a decision.
An outside appeal.
Outside
Oh,
appeal.
okay,
If they approve it
Okay,
and somebody
yeah.
disagrees, they can
Gotcha.
appeal that decision.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that,
Right.
yeah,
And you don't wanna bog down the
right, no, I agree,
operations of
okay.
the city too much, with, hey, we made a decision, now we've gotta wait 30 days
Yeah.
and see if
Yeah,
something
and
comes
then,
in.
and not only that, after the 30 days, then you go through the appeal process.
Right.
So, yeah, it would behoove the applicant and the city to have some of those things a lot shorter.
When you get an appeal, when somebody files an appeal to your decision now, I'm guessing it's pretty darn quick after you make your decision, or no?
It depends, they can certainly, an appellant can certainly take the entire time, of that time period to formulate their appeal, and sometimes, depending on what they're appealing, that's time well spent. So it really does sort of vary.
Okay.
Is there
Or
like
they can
best
hope to gain the
practices?
system.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is there a normal, like, what is normal?
Right, there are definitely best practices, and we can, do some more
30
research
minutes.
on that, and make sure we're kind of in line with some of the other cities' best practices. Currently, I don't think we're in line with those best practices.
So maybe it does make sense to base it on the type of appeal or what it's regarding.
Yeah.
Some
I think
appeals need
that would
it more
be,
time, I would think, than others,
that would be best practice to
yeah.
adjust it based on this type of decision is made.
That was it for the conflicts, so.
Yeah, I think the clarification will be easier to read and understand in the red line format as they get provided to you.
Do you want us to review these these and any comments or questions we have, get back to between now and the next meeting or at the next meeting
Yes, I would, do you think we can have the red lines by the next meeting?
I don't know, probably not, if we have to get it.
I guess if there's any that you really want us to consider of these, otherwise I think I'm good with housekeeping changes.
Yeah, and again, you know, we're bringing these to you more, of this is what we're seeing, and we're addressing them, not necessarily looking for direction.
Okay.
We just want you guys to know we are aware of this and we are fixing it.
It sounds like too from this discussion that even some of the conflict ones, you gotta kind of come up with some
Language.
language and then present it and see if it, you know, we agree with it or not, I guess. Or wanna tweak it or whatever. But other things, you don't, like you said, you don't even give us anything.
Yeah, besides the conflict and policy ones that we listed, staff has an idea of how we wanna address those. And those are the red lines, they will see them when we come to you back with the actual red lines in May.
Oh, yeah.
So you will see the language and then
I
we'll
will.
go through the public hearing.
Well, I will, I'll be involved still.
He just wants you to table everything until April, the first meeting's in April.
No,
Right.
and then, yes, I mean, in study sessions, you know, this is informational purposes only. You know, I think it's binding on this. So, in the essence of time, because I promised it would be between 8:30 and 9, and that's right in the middle. Any other questions about what we're gonna be doing for the next few months? And I will say, we'll try to bring you more specific language, on that. And then we'll have the decision criteria for you as well. And really leaning heavily on that submittal requirements that we've already established.
And include in the, you know, when you're doing that what you want from us. So when we see 8 pages, we don't freak out.
Yes, I will have very clear direction of your assignment should you choose to accept. Yep.
Okay, well, thank you, staff, for all the preparation, it was a good meeting.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I guess, with that, it would be adjourned. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you for behaving yourself tonight.